today I'm going to be doing something quite a bit different than what I normally do. I'm going to be going over some different ways that you can help your 808 or kick or whatever your low end is, kind of help cut through the mix. And excuse me, and I'm mostly going to be focusing on an 808 sound or like a kick sound, although this kind of like what I'm going to be going over in this video can also help with other bass sounds that you really want to cut through the mix that you can't really hear. So what I've done is I created this melody and I dragged in this 808 loop that I created for a song. Doesn't matter. I've got a melody that I just made and an 808 loop dragged in, and we're going to listen to them both at the same time. And I already consolidated them. That's what this is. It's the same thing as these two together. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be taking this and making changes to it, and then we're going to compare that to what everything sounds like before the changes. Okay, so let's listen to what it sounds like before anything has been changed. So this is just the melody that I created with this 808 loop on top of it. So here's what it sounds like. Okay, so it's kind of a thumpy 808, but what you'll notice is it's kind of hard to hear the 808. And what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be exploring some different ways that we can make this 808 easier to make. So let's look at the individual melody pieces and let's start examining things that we can do to like make room for our 808 to make sure that it can cut through the mix and we can really hear it. So here's just the melody, like without the 808. And you'll notice we have different things going on. I've got this kind of low sound, very low sound, okay? We've got this going on, which is kind of mid-range, and a little bit of low end. This is kind of high end, maybe a little bit of mid-range, and then a little bit of everything, but mostly mid and high range. So I intentionally chose and made this melody so that it has a lot of something. And what you'll notice when we hear all of it together again, there's a lot of low end happening like all the time. In fact, I already have everything on the mixer channel, and on each one I've got some different effects. However, I have things muted that we're going to talk about later. But anyway, so here are my different melodic pieces. Okay, and I've got some different effects on them. Like I said, let's take all of them and route them to one channel so that we can just look at everything together. Okay, so like I said, and as you can probably hear, look at all this low end we've got going on. So when I play the 808 at the same time as this, okay, one of the reasons why you might not be able to hear your 808 is because you have all this stuff in the low end competing with the 808. So in this video, the main thing I'm going to be focusing on is making room for the 808 in this low end down here. Okay, so let's come back up to our melodies, close this out, okay, and let's find the elements of our melody that are the lowest in frequency. Okay, this one's pretty high. Oh, and by the way, this is why I put an EQ on everything so that we can see the frequencies. This is the same, so mostly high range, some mids. Here we got a lot of lows. Okay, we got a lot of lows down here. And then on this one, we also have a lot of lows. Okay, we don't even have to look at it. We can just hear how low it is. So what I'm going to do first is these two things that are really, really low. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is throw an EQ on them. Okay, and I've already started to do this, as you can see. And I'm going to start cutting out some of this low end. Okay, now I don't want to cut out all the low end. Okay, I don't want to do something as drastic as this, because as you can hear, we're losing a lot of that quality to the sound. Okay, so what a lot of people recommend, and it's a good idea, is to start from basically nothing, play the sound, and then just keep playing the sound and dragging this down, taking out the low end until you hear like a difference in the sound or the character that you don't like. Okay, so Right around here, I'm starting to notice a difference in the sound. So maybe just a little bit further than that. Okay, so I'm just cutting out some of these low end, some of this low end here. Okay, just a little bit of this low end. All right, and then I'm gonna come over here to this one and I'm gonna do something similar. Okay, so I'm gonna turn on an EQ. And I'm gonna start from basically nothing. And I'm gonna start dragging it down until I start to notice a difference in like the character of the sound. And as you can notice, on this one, I can go pretty far before I notice anything. So once I get to here, I'm starting to cut into the main part of these lower frequencies. So I might want to back it off a little bit and then maybe put a little bit of a, I don't know what the name of this is, but like a curve down so that it slowly takes off some of these lower frequencies, but it doesn't chop it off like I'm doing on the end here. Okay. All right. So let's listen to everything with only those two changes made. Okay, let's compare it to the original. Okay, and you can do this with the other elements as well. So I'm going to come over to this one. Let's turn on the EQ and let's just look and see what's going on. Okay, one thing I'm noticing right away is with this particular synth, there's a huge jump in the low end when the sound tends to start. And I might not want that right away because that might, again, be competing with some of my low end. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just start dragging this forward until I notice a difference in sound. And then I'll pull it back just a little bit from there. All right, let's do the same thing with this one. I'm going to isolate this one because it's kind of hard to hear it. There's some high frequencies here you could shelf out. This isn't the point of the video, but anyway, we can take out some of the low end here. All right, now let's listen to everything together. Okay, so one thing we can do is take out some of those low frequencies, all right? Another thing we can do is we can mess with stereo separation. So oftentimes when people are putting basses in their songs, kicks, 808s, what have you, they often make sure that they're in mono. So they'll go ahead and take this knob and merge it. And I think the signal is already merged when I made it. So this is probably not doing anything, but I'm just going to do it for a visual so we can see. But they oftentimes put their bass, their kick, whatever, in mono for various reasons. And so one idea is if you have your bass or your kick in mono, you can then take your other low frequencies that are in your beat and push them out to the sides so that they're not in mono. So that even if there are low frequencies hitting at the same time as the bass or the kick, they're not in the same mono space. They're in the separated space, meaning it's not being played like in the center, it's being played on the sides. So the idea is you're taking those low frequencies that might be competing with your kick or your 808, and you're pushing them out to the sides and getting them out of the way. Okay, so let's start with the instruments that had like a lower sound to them. So I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to do a couple of different things. The first thing I'm going to do, the easiest thing, without adding any plugins, there's this knob right here that I played with on this one and made this one mono. If you pull it the opposite direction, you'll see up here at the top left, I was going to put my mouse up there, but it goes away. At the upper left corner on the hint bar, you'll see it's changing the separated percentage. And I like to take these pretty far, like between 95 and 100%. And you can get a similar or the same effect by using a plugin that is within FL Studio called Spreader. So if you want to find it, you go to where it says Gain and then go down to Spreader. Okay, so let me activate this. and you'll see this is what it looks like. Automatically, it's going to have the spread up to 50%, and you probably want to lower that depending on what the sound is, because as you spread things out in the stereo field, it can change the sound, like the characteristic of the sound. So you want to be careful with how much you do this. So basically, just kind of play around with this until you get a character that you're okay with, and then this knob is essentially doing the same thing as this knob down here. So you can separate things further, or you can put them in mono, merged, okay? So if we're already almost fully separating it here, separating it more here isn't going to do too much. But one thing you can do is affect the spread. So let's just turn this off and just kind of look and see what it looks like. So before I put this separation on it, and then we can separate it. And I think this separation is affecting it after this, so we might not see it here. But then you can turn this on and spread the stereo separation out, and as you can see, it's really pushing everything out to the sides instead of keeping it in the middle. And this knob is doing something similar. Okay, if you push this all the way out, you'll see the sound is now being pushed all the way out to the sides. We don't want it to do that much, because like I said, if you do this too much, you can affect the characteristic of the sound. You also want to be careful with this in terms of volume, because you might notice with this off, I'm hitting at under -12 dBs. With this on, I'm suddenly jumping up above that. Okay, so be careful when you're messing with stereo separation that your gain isn't getting, too high, or make sure you're adjusting accordingly. So let's add a little bit of stereo separation, maybe 30%. Like I said, this knob isn't going to do much since I'm already separating it a lot here. Let's go to the other sound and do something similar. So this is what this one looks like normally. So let's take the stereo separation pretty far. As you can hear, I kind of changed the characteristic a little bit, so maybe I want to pull that back. And then this is spread 25%. We can maybe go a little bit further. It wasn't on. Yeah, maybe right there. And again, I'm hearing some frequencies on the high end. Okay, so I've pushed these two low things out to the sides stereo-wise. And I don't want to do that with everything. So since I'm doing that with the things that are on the low end, I want like a mixture of things that are more separated and things that aren't. So I'm going to leave these two alone for now, and let's just hear what everything sounds like together. Okay. So let's compare that to the original. Okay, and if we want to exaggerate some of these effects, we can obviously take a little bit more off the low end on some of these. But like I said earlier, you want to be careful with how much you're doing this, because you will affect the characteristic of the sound when you do this. Okay, so that's another thing you can do, is mess with the stereo separation, and that can help make a little bit of room for your bass or your 808. Okay, so you can mess with the stereo. You can lower the low end of some of your melodic pieces that have more low end in them, especially. Another thing you can do, and if you have FL Studio, this comes stock with it, is Patcher. Well, now if you're first starting out, this can be overwhelming. As you can see, if I right click here, there's a lot going on here, and it's very hard to know what 90% of this is. And in fact, I don't even know what a lot of the stuff is, because I haven't used it before. But the thing that we're going to be looking at today is something called mid-side EQ. So if you just open up an instance of Patcher, so I've got the Patcher opened up on the on all of my melodic instruments. This is called mid-side EQ, and what this does, and this automatically does this for you, so you don't have to like do any finagling with different VSTs or anything like that. But it splits your signal, and in this case it's the melodic signal, into your middle and your side EQs so that you can affect them differently. Start over. So as we can see in the midsection, we've got a lot going on in the low end. And that can be a problem for hearing an 808 or a kick. So one thing that you can do is you can automate, you can either take out the low end of just the middle, which will affect the characteristic of the whole sound a little bit less, overall sound less, and be more specific with, you know, what you're taking out. So if we just take out some of the lows in the midsection, and so you can just do this in the middle. And another thing, a more complex thing that you can do, and this is something I do when I'm mixing and mastering a beat, is you can automate this. So I'll come to just the middle EQ, so just the EQ for the mids, and I will come over here, let's activate this, and then create automation clip. And so I just created an automation clip for this little dial, which as you can see, affects it like this. So what I'm going to do is every time that kick or 808 comes in, I'm going to duck down the low range, but just for the middle signal, like just the signal going to the mids, not affecting the signal going to the sides at all. So I've just got the mids right here. Okay, so one thing you can do is create an automation clip just like this. And so you want the minimum to be like the starting point for it. So the minimum is normally like, for me, it's like 12%, something like that. It's only fine, 13 is fine. So that's where it's going to start. Okay, so that's our minimum. And maximum is like how far you want it to go. And I tend to take this one between like 30 and 60, depending on what I'm doing. Let's start with like 50, okay? So it's going to start here and duck down to whatever 50% is. Let's just look at it. So it's really fast. Let me slow this down so we can just see it. So that's how far it's going to take it right there, and that's pretty far. However, I'm going to automate it so that it only happens the instant that 808 happens. So I'm going to put this everywhere that I see an 808, okay? You can put one right there, put one right there, put one right there. And this can be pretty tedious, especially if you're doing it for a whole, you know, like a whole track. But it is one way that you can do this. And I'm pretty sure there are like plugins that will do this automatically so that you don't have to do this manually. But this is one option. And this option also doesn't cost money, unless, you know, aside from paying for FL Studio to begin with. But this video is assuming you already have FL Studio. Okay, so I put these automation clips everywhere the 808 hits. So this is only going to be happening when the 808 hits. And you can do this not just for the melodic instruments, but you can also do it for, I like to do it with the like claps and snares as well. Because oftentimes I don't have a clap or a snare hitting at the same time as an 808. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I don't. So taking out the low end of the signal of the claps or your snares of just the mid-range, the instant that the kick or the 808 happens, 99% of the time is literally not even noticeable at all, even if you're taking the signal down a lot. So on this one, I'm only bringing it down to like here. If you're doing it with the snares, you can get away with bringing it down even further on just the mid-range, because like I said, oftentimes the snares and claps aren't hitting at the same time as the 808. So you're not going to notice it if that low signal is just being taken out completely. And it may not make a huge difference in a lot of cases, but in some cases it might. And my philosophy when it comes to this sort of thing is like a bunch of small differences end up making a big difference in the end. So, all right, let's listen to this one more time, and then we'll compare it to the original. to what we just did. And keep in mind, I created this example to be kind of extreme. Like, I have two different instruments that have a bunch of low end going in at the same time. And I also have four different instruments and melodies all playing at the same time in a beat or whatever. When I'm arranging it, I'm going to be taking out 75% of these melodies at any given moment. So the differences are going to be even greater with how easily you'll be able to hear the kick or the 808. And I'm also, like I said, I'll be doing something similar when I go to arrange and mix and master a beat. I'll be doing a similar thing with like the snares. I'll be taking out the low end of the middle signal of the snares. And then I do something similar with my snares as I do my 808s and my kicks. I'll take out like the mid range of things. Like oftentimes I'll come to my 808 and I'll do something similar. Sometimes I'll take somewhere in this mid-high range and I'll do something like this. Bring it down, create automation clip. And then I usually have my snares hitting. Here, I'll just drag in a snare pattern really quickly. So here's a snare loop, snare clap loop. So really what I'm focusing on is this main snare clap here. And that's normally on the 2 or the 4, depending on what genre you're making. And so one thing I like to do is everywhere my main snare hits, I like to create an automation clip. And again, this can be kind of tedious, and there are ways to like do this automatically with plugins. But this is one way to do it by hand without having to pay extra money to do it. So create an automation clip that looks like this, and then we want to make the maximum for my 808. So let me detach this so we can see what's going on. So I'm creating an automation clip for my 808, and I don't want my 808 to start this, like this, because I don't want my 808 sounding like that. I don't want to raise all these frequencies up all the time. So we're going to make the maximum 50%. And sometimes I like to do 51% if I just want to raise up these frequencies a little bit overall. But for the purposes of this, we'll just keep it at 50, keep it simple. So it's going to start flat. Okay, so it's starting flat. And then you can play with how much you want to take away depending on the 808 and the situation. Oftentimes I just take out all of it, so I keep it at 0. And then, like I said, we want to put this everywhere one of our main claps or one of our main snares is. So we can just copy this. So you can see everywhere that main snare or clap is hitting, we're lowering the mid-high frequency range of the 808. And you can play with this frequency, with the range of this, depending on what your clap or your snare is mostly sitting in. But this is usually around the area I like to take out. And you'll notice you don't really hear a difference in the 808 itself, because I'm not just taking this frequency out all the time. I'm only taking it out right when that clap or that snare hits. So even if the 808 isn't playing during, like, let's say this moment right here. So like right here, the 808 isn't hitting at that moment, but there's still some like residual sound going on there. Now, I don't want to cut out all the sound, because then my 808 might sound like choppy and weird. So what I'm doing is I'm just carving out this frequency when that clap or that snare hits. So you're not going to notice it. Like audibly, you're probably not going to notice this in the 808. But if you do this, like carve out a little bit of a frequency range for the snare in the 808, if you do something similar in your hi-hat pattern as well, and then you can do something similar in the mid-range of your melodies, assuming your snare is hitting in the middle, you can play with that depending on what it is. But if you do this just a little bit in a lot of different places, you can make a pretty big difference with how easily heard your main snare or clap is. And so you can use this for all kinds of different sounds. Like if you have a sound that you really want to pop through a mix, This is a tedious way to do it, but this is one way to do it. You can go through and carve out different frequencies of other things that might be taking up some of that space during those moments. So let's compare. I'm going to take off I'm going to mute the clap because that wasn't the main purpose. But let's one more time. Let's compare what we started with to what we ended up with. What we've done. And I forgot to mention this earlier. YouTube compresses the audio. So some of the differences that I'm noticing when I'm sitting here recording this might not be entirely noticeable once the video actually goes up to YouTube. So keep that in mind.